So, as Harry mentioned, I direct a program for graduate students and postdocs. It's called Writing in Science and Engineering, which is fun now because it means that I actually interact with everybody who writes about data. So the name is wrong already because I work with the social scientists as well. And to the degree that data is starting to show up in other places in the university, eventually it's going to be everybody, but that's not where it is right now. And I ended up there because my background's in molecular biology. So that's my PhD is from MIT. One of my classmates won the Nobel Prize. I anticipated a life of research and working in research labs. And I made a switch after graduate school for a bunch of reasons, but one significant one that's connected to what we do here is that although I had phenomenal mentors, and I really did, who were excellent at explaining what's a productive line of inquiry, how do you know you're done, when do you have enough controls, when it came time to write, nobody had very much to say. So that was number one. I will now say, and then I couldn't say at the time because it was way too daring, but I will say it now. And a lot of what they had to say actually wasn't helpful at all and probably got in the way. But you have to, I wasn't in a position to, I sort of felt it and then thought it was something wrong with me because that's what we do. So I didn't, and that was a little weird. Like, suddenly here was this thing that I was supposed to know how to do because I had written a paper 3 years ago in a graduate course or something like that. I should be able to write a research article. That's a crazy idea. Nobody knows how to write a research article the first time, even if they know about research, and so there's a learning curve there. So the other thing I noticed, which I find in most professional settings to be true, I noticed that when I was writing about my data, about my research, although my data did not change, my results did. That as I was writing, it wasn't that I went back in the lab and did new experiments or got new findings, but what it was that they meant, what I wanted to claim, what I believed to be true, how it connected with what everybody else did, that was continuing to shift and evolve and develop as I was writing. And that's partly where I got really interested because it seemed to me that, a lot of the science is actually happening in that transition from the raw data to the published manuscript. And yet nobody, including all these people in these great places, seem to have anything systematic or even very helpful to say about that. And it seems to me that there's something going on here, and it wouldn't be interesting to figure out what that is.
So when you say that, though, do you mean that your perspective changed, or the ongoing science was changing?
So I don't make a distinction between those. If it's your research and you have new findings, even to say you have new findings, to move, you've collected data, but there's a move to go from I have data and I have a finding with that data, and that's an interpretive move. And it seems that a lot of that, at least some of that interpretation often happens for the first time when people are writing. And it happens, and it particularly happens, we are also talking about in conversation. So one of the things I can now say, which I didn't know at the time, is so I'm the director of this program for graduate students, but I'm also one of the directors of the writing program at Princeton. So we work with everybody from freshmen all the way up through, I do a proposal workshop in the fall that gets 100 people, including faculty at it. So it's trying to meet everybody. And I work with people from all the disciplines across the university. So what I now say is that what sets scientific writers apart from everybody else is not the things that most of us say are different. It's not that we write about numbers and other people don't, because the economists do. It's not that we write about images and other people don't. Actually, art historians write about images all the time. And one of the things I discovered meeting with people who teach in art history and teach how to write papers in that field is they have to teach them a vocabulary for talking about images. If you give people, medieval Renaissance art, you can have two images that are identical in content. They're picking the same moment in the life of Jesus or something, but they're completely different pictures, and you can see that they're different. But if you only have vocabulary for content, then it's really hard to explain and name and talk to other people about what you see as a difference. So we write about images, we write about numbers. Neither of those are unique. What's unique about people in the sciences is we write corporate documents. We write collaboratively. Almost 100% of the time. It's really crazy in physics because physics research articles now have like 45 authors. And there are people who are studying, what does it mean to be an author in physics? How does your career work when you have 10 publications in which you are one of 45 authors? How does that? But even, people in medical, environmental, scientific fields end up in organizations where they write on teams. And so I've had a contract off and on. I have one currently with the Environmental Protection Agency, which is my extreme version of it. I got brought on and had, the preparation was reading a document that they had just put out that was 2,222 pages long and had 65 authors. And there is a corporate position there, and there needs to be a kind of corporate entity to that. So the extreme version of this is that scientists are always writing collaboratively. And it's not only that we don't talk about writing, but because we don't talk about writing, it really gets in the way of collaboration. It becomes purely about power, quite often. The senior author gets to, however they want to say it, we just say yes, and because otherwise it's a bunch of circular conversations. So I made a switch. I ended up in writing programs. It's been really interesting. Partly because I get to do things like this, and so I talk to people at medical schools and other places. And the other reason I made the switch, so I had this thing coming out of graduate school thinking, there's something going on here, but I don't know what it is, and it was a little later that I, essentially as a postdoc, figured out what it was, which was a way of talking about writing. So we're going to dive into what we're going to do. I ended up at Duke University, and I met the then director of writing programs, who had been involved with a few other people in developing an approach to writing that sounds really simple and is really simple, but it's been profound. Like, it was cool. Most conversations about writing are from the perspective of the writer, even in a writing class. Like, you need to write something. What can you do next? Because it's concerned with, here's the writer and what can they do? And things that have ideas that have emerged from in the academy and from the humanities and from linguistics, as well as from cognitive psychology, et cetera, flipped that around and says, actually, the way language works is not in the hands of writers. Writers are trying to grab this language environment they're in, because language is determined by the readers, by users. The whole point of writing a manuscript is you write something and you think you know what it is that you want to say, but ultimately you're going to be gone 20 years from now or 5 years from now. And if somebody else finds that useful, it's because they read it and they've made sense of it. And so the extreme view is, and this is the part that comes out of even philosophy, that these are just marks on a page, but the fact that I can translate them into names and those names have corresponded to you is an interpretive process in the head. This is purely arbitrary. And so all of that, much of that is happening in the head of readers. And this turns out to be a great gift, because anybody in the professional world is a way more experienced reader than writer. And what I say I like working with postdocs. They're a lovely little niche, because graduate students look horrified when I say this, but postdocs all know that by the time they finish their graduate work, the ratio of papers they have read to papers they have written is going to cross about 10 to the third and stay pretty stable for the rest of their careers. Just because. Jump in. We're 4 people. This is great.
I think it's a really interesting concept. And I'm sure you have this experience more often than not, as you read an article in a journal and you say, really? You're published? This is getting published? Either because you've just restated the obvious.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, we knew this already. We've known this for 20 years. Or why is it important?
Yeah.
So obviously the person who said, let's publish this is a different reader.
Yep. So the good news is that, and it's a perfect setup here. The good news is that, no, it's perfect. This is the kind of, this is going to be great. A conversation all night. This is much better than, this is why I'm panicked about how do we do this remotely. Because if you don't lecture, how do you teach this kind of stuff? Okay. So the good news is that we're much more experienced readers than writers. The bad news is it's readers plural. So, and that actually is the real challenge on some level. There's nothing I can do, even the stuff that I'm going to do in the fall, which is really going to be very technical and nitty-gritty. There's nothing I can do to teach somebody how to write a sentence such that everybody who reads it will interpret it the same way. And I can put it up on the board. I mean, so the big issue in writing, and it's terrible, is that context controls meaning. That unfortunately writing is always in context, and therefore, even if you get the most beautiful sentence in the world, if you shift the context, it's a mess. It doesn't work. And so part of what writers, this is why I say what writers are doing, is trying to sort of draw upon their understanding of the situation and respond to it. And put their voice in and their meaning into a conversation in the hopes that it will get picked up and furthered without them. So writing's always in conversation. This is also part of why we're going to do this as workshops, because we want to think, I like to think about it in terms of readers, plural, which means so checking in with our own experience as a reader, that's one reader. There's something called the internalized sense of your readers, which may be the same as you, but it might be a little different. Sometimes people read one way but assume that other people are very different from them. My graduate students do this all the time. And then there's a third thing that comes out of composition and rhetoric. Actually, it's out of literary theory, what's called the reader in the text. So the sense of, as you're reading a text, who the author seems to be projecting or constructing as the person who's supposed to be reading this and what they're supposed to do and how. And those don't always line up. So one of the things about being in a group is we get a chance to read, put a vocabulary for what that reading is, and talk about it, but also compare our experience with everybody else. And so that's why I call this workshop Learning to Read Your Readers' Minds. Because it's really fun. It's the moment where people think, this is absolutely clear, and they discover it. Everybody else in their group says, no, it's not. You're like, and there's so that back and forth, and that's a moment of expanding our understanding of who might pick up our language and try to do something with it. Okay, so thinking about writing from the reader's perspective, I'm going to get a couple more terms here. This is the work actually of originally Joseph Williams, who had a colleague, Greg Colomb. Both of them have passed on. My colleague, where I learned this at Duke, was George Gopin, who is still around. And what Joe realized, he was reading he was actually, full backstory here, is it was at the University of Chicago after the Second World War, where the veterans came back and you couldn't put them in freshman composition because that was sort of silly. These people had liberated Europe. And so they were studying, how do you teach adult learners, and what are the ways that and so they've developed a whole different writing program out of that. And part of what came out of it, what Joe recognized from reading the cognitive psychology literature, is that readers bring a lot of experience to the act of reading, and that experience shapes what they do with language when they meet it. And the way it gets summarized is that readers have relatively fixed expectations about where in the structure of language they will find certain elements of its substance. That's everything I do. That's all 5 workshops on some level, variations on that. And so it's the piece that says there are things we can say about what most readers will do, because structure influences interpretation at all levels. Now, what this means essentially is that when we're reading a bunch of words on the page, we take a lot of our instructions about what to do with it from our interpretation of what is its structure. Is this a memo? Is it a newspaper report? Is it a press release? Is it a research article? Is it a review article? All of those are structural questions. What is it? And we use that to guide interpretation. This is a really easy sell to scientists because we have the most highly structured document, which is the research article with its separate sections. Research articles in other fields are much more freewheeling and like doing other things. So we've all read papers where the sections don't actually the material doesn't line up. You're reading in the results section and you get bogged down in experimental detail and you want to start shaking, like, don't you know? Or here's one that's more, I think, more telling. you're reading in the results section and you realize that what Natalie just described, the sense of like, I don't think this is a result. Don't we already know this? Why is this? Or the version of, wait a minute, I don't believe that. I see that you got this data and you've made this claim, but I don't. But that feels like a discussion kind of interpretation. Yeah, you're nodding. So then that's that reader experience. And when we get that moment of like, oh, wait a minute, I don't think that's justified. It's really interesting. Even the graduate students will say, oh, I get really suspicious then. I read the rest of the results section to figure out what are they trying to put over me. Now, the same sentence in the discussion section, no problem. So that's part of what I mean by we take instruction from the location of information about how to read it and what to do with it. And what Joe figured out in this, it's called the Little Red Schoolhouse approach, is that structure is everything in language, that what a language is a set of words and structures. That Steven Pinker has a book called Words and Rules as the nature of language. And so what makes it a language is how it is structured. And that, at least in English, the structure of English leads to instructions about what to do with information. Okay, so that's sort of the big umbrella here. And the thing I wanted to look at was, how does that work in abstracts? Because abstracts tend to give us to talk about what's going on in an abstract is to come up with vocabulary to talk about the entire paper and to start to name what it is that we as readers are expecting to find when we read a research article. One of the things, step out for a moment, one of the things that I know from working with writers, so when I develop all this stuff for thinking about readers, my goal is to figure out, if you understand readers better, then how do you turn that into guidance for you as a writer? If I know what I'm trying to get you to do, and I know better what you're likely to do with what I've given you, I'm going to have a better chance at actually getting my message across. So what I know from working with writers is that quite often writers leave things out because it's up here, and they've collapsed the distance between themselves and their reader. It's hard for us to think about other people's minds, and particularly other people's minds that are in different contexts. If context controls meaning and we don't give the context, then the reader's going to come up with a different meaning unless they have a similar context. So this is about trying to name what it is that we expect so that we can, on a sort of systematic way, we can do two things. We can talk to our co-authors if they don't give us what we expect, and they have to do it because they're the ones that know, like, where is the method in this thing? Oh, right, I didn't put it in there. Great. That's often really helpful to say, this is missing. But also we can evaluate, is what I'm getting and what I make of it actually what the writer intends me to make of it? So we've been talking, I guess we've talked a little bit about process here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, because I like to say there have been three breakthroughs in the teaching of writing, which sounds a little weird because writing's been around for 5,000 years, but I think is actually true. The first time I heard this, I was sitting there saying, there are breakthroughs in, epigenetics, but maybe not in writing. One is the cognitive psychology of how readers read and the degree to which structure controls meaning. Second is the psychologizing of writing, that people have recognized that most of the conversations about writing are about the final product and not about how you get there. And it turns out when you study how people get there, the research article, especially in science and medicine, is the product of a process of removing things. That lots of stuff shows up along the way that gets taken out. And if you don't know that and you're trying to write it in one step, it doesn't work. So it's a way of working with colleagues. And the other thing is that if we want to know more about how readers read, it's really helpful to give drafts to readers and let them talk to us, which is something we don't do in science very often, in part because of the way we give feedback in science, which is we're always looking for, like, well, this is not interesting. Why are you bothering me with this? One of my colleagues, this very prominent person in composition studies, calls it the doubting game, which all of us learned because that was how we got to learn how to do what we do. how could this be wrong? How could it be fooling me? How could this not be what I think it is or what you think it is? But for working with drafts and thinking about readers, it helps to play something that Peter Abel called the believing game. Here's this draft, it is incomplete, it's not, probably doesn't have anything in it, but can I imagine what it's trying to become and help the writer and me figure out if that's true, how would the writer produce that and hand it over? Okay, so that's prelude. We'll do the first move. So tell me what you learned as a writer about abstracts. And if somebody told you about it, like, did somebody teach you abstract writing?
So it's just something that kind of draws you in.
Okay.
You want to know more.
Okay.
And kind of like a summary of.
Somebody start putting things up here, yeah. So that's an interesting one. So the sense of drawing somebody in.
I mean, to me, like I would, I look at abstracts and see if I'm interested in it, and if I'm going to go look at that poster.
Okay.
I'll read that piece.
Yes. And so you've already made the move. That's a reader's perspective. Right? That's like, what am I trying to do with this? And this is the moment of saying, probably nobody said that at the beginning. What I find, you want to jump in? Anybody else?
Yeah, if the abstract would have what I'm looking for. If it doesn't have any or language that I'm looking for, then I don't read it.
Okay. So reader's perspective is, language, key terms.
Right. Correct.
Right? What is this about? Sure.
So, I think many of us learn to write an abstract from reading abstracts.
But
Not necessarily.
Well, I mean.
So what does that mean?
But
What did you learn?
that nobody sits there and says, okay, this is what.
An abstract really is.
This is what should be in your introduction in an abstract. This is right.
That's true.
Right.
You're right.
So the
Abstract is just going to
abstract. So it's inchoate, and it's ad hoc, and there's no vocabulary. And I work with students all the time. That is this Harry's heard this moment. I described that is a pedagogy for teaching writing, because nobody knows how to write an abstract automatically. But it's a pedagogy of the random walk.
But so the other thing is, and depending on the hat that I wear, right, is sometimes the abstract is the end all be all.
Right.
That is it. So, right. And so that's all you write, and
Yes.
with intention. But there are other times where you write the manuscript with the intention then of needing to write the abstract for that manuscript.
Okay. Yeah. And
So pre and post manuscript writing. So you're writing an abstract. Sometimes you're writing an abstract before you write it, and then sometimes you're saying you're writing an abstract after.
Well-
what she's saying is, and maybe this is unique to the field of medicine, because it isn't. I mean,
no, so abstracts actually are separate documents. They have even abstracts for research articles go places that the article doesn't go. They get compiled into abstract compendium.
They get accepted
Sometimes
in a meeting,
they-
this
right, and
copy is an
so-
abstract that
exactly.
never goes anyplace else.
Yep.
Even if you attempt afterwards
To write the manuscript and do something else with it.
So in my experience, though, and maybe because I'm not trained as a physician, yes, the abstracts would go into chem abstracts or something else like that, but they always were part of the article, the journal article. But in medicine, I didn't learn this until I got here, and we'll start working at Cooper, that you can just write something called an abstract, and that could be, as you said, the end-all and be-all of the
Right, I mean,
document.
it's kind of like hanging
Yeah.
a poster somewhere. I mean,
Yeah.
it's no different. That's the end.
That's the end. It's not.
Hang a
It's not.
poster,
It's not a
display the
peer.
poster, and
Yeah.
So then there's.
Yeah, and so
I
that's
always
a.
thought it was a part of. I didn't realize that it was just. I have seen it though, but I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it could just be that by itself, and there was no document attached to it somewhere.
And what I'm going to say is, I'll bet you read, and if you get a report or a finding or an observation in an abstract alone, versus in an abstract with a journal article, you're gonna lean really differently. You're going to believe that finding and treat it differently. That's I'm flagging that as a structural thing. So we're taking, right,
Yeah.
yeah. Where is it showing up? It may be in an abstract, but even that, if that abstract is a freestanding document, or that abstract is connected to a journal article, we're going to interpret what we read in the abstract differently.
Right.
Yeah. So, and this is perfect, because when I'm looking for here, quoting George for this one, but it's great, I'm not looking for like, oh my God, I never thought of that, but in fact these moments of things that we know that don't get said. And particularly, so a lot of it has to do with your colleagues and your particularly junior colleagues and students. So, hey, join us. So I've taught in courses where students had to write abstracts and therefore they needed instruction. And the instruction isn't any more explicit than this. They say it's a summary, and they tell them how many words. As if 150 words that are more or less on the topic of what we're talking about will work. And as if the most important thing is how many words is it. So I'm flagging it I'm bringing it up this way because that's an example of talking about this totally from a writer's perspective. Reader's perspective, and let's shift over to it because you already started to, it's really much clearer what's going on. Like, writer's perspective, well, are these the right 150 words? I don't know. Reader's perspective, pretty quickly figure out if these are the right 150 words because we can think about the reader's intentions. So, why are you reading an abstract?
Because maybe it's a topic that I'm also working on, interested in seeing if what I'm doing has already been done.
Yep.
Or if this is going to offer additional information to help guide me, or I can use in my own background.
But interesting, what's the most irritating thing? You've read the abstract, and wow, this is cool, I gotta read the article, and then you read the article and you're like, yeah, no, they don't connect.
Lovely. Yeah, so...
Or they're not,
So from a reader's perspective,
right.
The purpose of an abstract is to inform the reader so the reader can accurately decide whether to invest resources in reading the article. Mm-hmm. Right? And in that sense, the perfect abstract is the abstract that allows all readers with 100% confidence to self-segregate into two pools. I must read this paper because I need it. I need to know this. My life will be different if and I can skip this one, and nothing bad will happen. And it is, it's an investment.
So that's just what you said.
Yeah, it's totally an investment. I mean, sometimes it's a monetary investment if you have to get it translated from Japanese and delivered, electronically, and you read, and you find it's like, oh. So we have this expectation and hope that the abstract accurately reflects what's in the article. Great. We are now ready for you guys to put things together, so that's the goal. The one thing I will say is I'll make a slight aside for conference abstracts because they're a little different. Okay. Right, in terms of the setting, right? Who's the first reader of a conference abstract? The conference organizers. Okay. So what are they trying to figure out?
If it matches what they're looking for as a topic, specified topic.
So it's interesting. So I do a lot of that.
Yeah. So tell us.
And I look for things that I think are that match what the topic is, but also that are
that are going to make for a good conference.
Yes. Right? That say enough that it's almost going to create dialogue between the writer of the abstract and the people, depending poster abstract, right? The people who are going to view it.
So let me try this on, that if you're the conference organizer, you have finite resources. You only have a certain number of slots to give to speakers at this conference or posters or whatever, and you're trying to make a really high impact conference where people walk away and say this was really worthwhile. Some of it might be because of dialogue between speakers. Some of it might be because of what they actually say. So you're making decisions. So the first reader is trying to figure out, do I invite you to the conference? And then the second readers is, okay, I've decided to invite you into the conference, and so we have another whole set of readers who read the abstract and decide whether to come to your talk or not. That's the one that I think sometimes is a little bit closer to drawing in because the opportunity costs are different. if the organizer makes a mistake, and the organizer will make a mistake, right? The costs are not terrible. God, that was a dud. I shouldn't have invited that person. So what? Often, though, the flip of it is, oh, it turns out this person wasn't as related to the topic as we thought, but they gave this really great talk. So that's the setting where it is a little more of sort of reaching out and calling an audience. I even think about it in terms of, like, if you have concurrent sessions, I read your abstract, I decide to go to your talk, I'm sitting there 2 minutes in, I realize I don't need to be here. One of two things can happen. One, I will get up and go to the next session, if I can, or I realize I don't need to be here, but you're such an engaging speaker that I suddenly learned something that I didn't intend to learn because you did such a good job of presenting it to me. Again, opportunity costs and benefits are different. So I want to think about research articles and publishing. So here's my question for you. This is the task, and you're going to talk among yourselves. What information would you need as a reader in order to, one, decide which pile to put this paper on the basis of the abstract, whether to read it or not read it? What do you want to know in making that decision? What information would help you make that decision and make it with confidence? Of course, we've all had the experience of reading an abstract where you get to the end and say, well, yeah, I think, but I'm not. So something else. So talk among you can talk to each other, and we'll put it up on the board. This is a brainstorming moment.
So you already said you're reading you're reading the abstract because you have some information that you're trying to gain from it, right? The purpose that you're reading the abstract. I'm in school, that's why I'm trying to learn how to write an abstract. So I look at these articles and I'm trying to figure out, okay, does this go with my topic? I have my topic.
I'm just going to start collecting.
So are any of the terms that I'm looking for in the abstract? And sometimes they just sit there, on the side, it looks like almost, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the topic itself. So that's what I'm looking for in the abstract.
So it's interesting because as you say that, I realize that when I'm reading an abstract, let's say in a journal that I'm reading, and I'm reading it for knowledge, for my own knowledge, I read it differently than when I read it for, are we going to accept this into the paper, or, I'm sorry, into the journal, or are we going to accept this into the conference? So I read it differently.
The audience, whether they're
Right. I never thought of that before.
Yeah. Reviewers are gatekeepers. You have an extra responsibility, which it's not just about, am I interested in this? Would I want to read it? But does it meet the criteria and standards and fulfill the mission that I've been charged with responsibility for?
Right.
Right.
That's why I read it.
And sometimes
That's the
I'm
best
reading
one for this mostly.
articles because I am a mentor for students who are doing their capstone project. So I'm always looking for papers that are that I feel like they should read. Like, I've read what they've got outlined. I see what references they have, and I'm like, there's got to be more out there on this. You guys need to, be looking every week to see what papers are out there, because I don't feel like you've covered enough ground.
So what information is in the abstract that triggers for you, oh yeah, this is one of the ones I need to pass over to them?
Sometimes if it's a differing view of what their hypothesis might be,
Okay. So
contradictory, so I don't know, it just depends on the topic for me.
I'm going to say, so this is one I'm going to jump in and say, there's actually, there's a more connection across topics, but we don't have this conversation, so we don't tend to see it. So yes, it feels like it's idiosyncratic to topic, but in fact, we're probably looking, what do you want to know about the topic? And you can stick with your field if you want. What would you want to know in order to decide whether you want to read? What information would help you make that decision and feel confident? You're also deciding not to read certain things. How? What's the information that's doing that?
So maybe some of it, to your point, is that they almost give you that 360 view.
Mm-hmm.
They can say, if we look at it from point A and we look at it from point B, we see that, but we're looking at it from point A.
Okay, so
So that it's not so focused on their perspective that they get everything else.
all right, so we are reading for novelty as part of is that a fair thing? We're expecting that a research article is going to do something. I mean, that's where you started, Natalie, with like, I read this and it's not doing anything new. I don't know why I'm reading it.
I mean, sometimes you see what their results are, and it's intriguing.
Okay, let me try.
I know more about that.
And if you read an abstract that had no results, could you do your job?
I'd be like,
It depends on what the other parts are.
I don't know. If you get a research article that doesn't tell you its results,
The research article that doesn't tell you its result versus an abstract. Because
no, I'm asking. We're trying to make a map between the research article. The abstract of a research article that doesn't tell you the results. How do you decide whether you want to read it or not? It doesn't mention the results. It doesn't name what the findings are.
so you might think, well, it's not
They're
worth
hiding them.
reading. It's not worth reading.
It's not worth
So
reading, or do
if
I
I'm
really
gonna
want to
make a
invest
decision-
figuring it out? What information would help you make a decision about whether to read or not? The results, right? What do I want to know? I want to know what the topic is. Definitely want to know what the results are. I want to know that there are results, and I want to be
Even
particularly.
if there's no difference, like if you expected some kind of outcome and you found there was no difference between two populations
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah, I would argue that in a research paper we expect there to be results, or findings, or something.
That work for them, they should let you know.
Absolutely.
And it's not useful if it's no change, or if it's not.
I think so.
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
It's not that they have to be surprising or confirmatory.
Because
But if they haven't
that might mean you
delineated
can
what
use
they
this
found,
method or this
you want
method,
me to
and you'll
figure out
still
what you
have
found?
the
Okay, so let's get some more up there. So it sounds like the results are in part an answer. What else do you want to know?
How'd you get there?
Right? Or at least approach. And I'm flagging that because sometimes methods are really specific. People, when you say, I want to know the method, and it's like, really? You want me to name the algorithm? And and often naming the algorithm actually doesn't help a reader, because unless I know that algorithm, then I don't even know what that's what I call approach. What does it do? What is your method? What is the verb that goes with your method? Okay, so we want to know about the method. What else do we want to know? Sure, okay. Results, and I'll just put, and anything that, and this is very, validity. Yes, okay. So anything, results in anything that that my field knows that needs to be said in order to validate that this is a legitimate result. Like psychology, a lot of human subjects things, you got to put some statistics in there. If you make a claim, this is what it is, and we don't have error bars or some p-values or something, knowledgeable readers say, I don't believe this. They don't know what they're doing because they didn't give me the essential information to validate that they know what they're doing.
What about
How about a hypothesis or a statement of why here?
Yeah, absolutely. And just notice how I know that this is one of the most, we all know this, but because we don't have conversations about it, it's taking a long time to put the things that everybody knows explicitly on the board. This is part of where it gets to be fun, because when it is explicit, you sort things really fast. Okay, so a hypothesis, a problem, a purpose, that was Harry's word, a question, something about that. Okay, so now it's going to get interesting, and actually somebody said conclusions. I'm going to rephrase this, like implications. which might be a conclusion, but the result is X and it means Y. And this one I tend to also put in brackets because depending on the field and the journal, sometimes you give the implications and sometimes you don't. Right? Broad articles going into journals with broad readership almost always have to do this because otherwise people get in this like, huh? But very specialized journals, sometimes you say, we found X, and everybody goes, woo! And we don't have, and it feels redundant to say more. Okay, so here's the tricky bit. One of the things that came up early was a sense of novelty, an interest, you were saying, Jocelyn, of like, how is this different from what other people have done? So, how do we recognize novelty? How do readers recognize novelty? And that might be like, why is she asking? But it's actually a funny, it's Plato's paradox, actually, it's in the language. To recognize is to cognicize, to know, and RE is to know again. So to recognize is to know something again, which is why, I've met Harry before, I recognize him. Okay, how do we recognize the new? How do we know that what I'm reading is something I don't know, or that nobody knows, or that it's completely new?
Well, it's often in the introduction.
Or how the writer writes it.
So that's what, and how is that? Because so I would say it is Plato's paradox because he said, how do we ever recognize the new? And his answer was that we used to know everything and then at birth we forgot, and so that learning is a process of remembering. This doesn't carry a lot of weight with most scientists and medicine people, although that might be true for language. That language is hardwired and we recapture it in every generation. But that's generally not that's not an explanation particularly satisfying to most of us for being able to recognize the new, that we used to know it and therefore we can see it when we see it again. How do we know that something is new?
It says this novel of
And
you haven't seen it before?
How do you know that?
Can you check your memory banks and see if you've seen that that bit of
Well, that
data?
means everything, right? And so that's...
A lot of it is easy to recognize.
How?
So what are we doing with group beta strep and the newborn now? Okay, put this, check. And then you'll find out if there's something novel that you haven't already seen papers on.
So there's a move there. There's a cognitive move that says, how do I know that this is new? Because I know it's not old.
So it doesn't fit any of those
I'm doing a comparison between, I know I don't know this because here's what I know, and this is not in it. And how do I know what I know? Well, in an abstract, really fast. So let me put some vocabulary up here. And then we're going to test all of this. So this is pulling out what we tend to know intuitively, almost, but like from experience. This is what experience has done for us, but we don't have vocabulary for capturing it, which makes it really idiosyncratic. So we want to get oriented to the hypothesis, which is a gap or an unknown, because then if we get a result, I believe you if you say, we don't know X, and here's a result. It's like, oh, now we know X. Great. Okay. So these two are connected to each other. How do we recognize the unknown? By finding out about the known. And I'm going to do another one of these vocabulary shifts. People often talk about, oh, I need to give you background. Background is a terrible word, particularly in an abstract. Are you interested in the background? No. We're interested in the foreground, but we can only see the foreground if we have some background to contrast the new thing against the old thing. So the word that we use, and I brought our lexicon that we use for this, is rather than talking about background information, we talk about orienting information. And that's a reader perspective. That as a reader, one of my needs is I got to get oriented. And I got to get oriented to a lot of things. What is the topic? What organism are we in? What system are we in? The number of abstracts that forget to tell you whether it's in mice or yeast, is sort of staggering. That they just, it's the kind of, that's why I say people leave things out. But we want to get oriented to the, what is it, is this in my field? Because that's, no, I'm not reading anything in this field. I'm done. This is a paper about X. Great, I'm going to go read something else. This is a paper about X. Oh, what about X? So I want to get oriented to the topic, oriented to what's known, in order to get oriented to what's not known and its significance. Like, why do we care? Right? This is caught in that purpose thing. Why are we even the world is full of unknowns. Not all of them generate research questions that anybody else wants to read. And I have a limited amount of time. I will never read all the papers that I should read in my lifetime. How does this one tell me that that this is one I need to read? And so I like to talk about this as terms of a motivating problem and an expectation that if I read the abstract, I will understand why this is being offered as a piece of research. What's motivating the writer to do it, but also what's motivating me to read it, because I can see, okay, so there's a gap, there's a problem, there's some purpose. How are we going to get there? What did you find? What else do I need to know about it? What does it mean? It's a map of, I would say, expectations for what the information in an abstract. And it's going to vary, the specific information will vary from field to field. But the kind of information, the categories, which is structural, are going to be pretty consistent. Or at least that's my hypothesis. So where we are is I'm going to set you to do a task. You've got this handout. So this is the testing moment. We have a map for abstracts. I give you 4 abstracts on the first 2 pages. 1, 2, 3, 4. What I want you to do is read them, rank them quickly. Rank them the way you, like, is this any good, or am I frustrated with it? They're not in your field, but read, rank, and then after you've ranked, start talking among yourselves. So you're comparing how you read to how somebody else read. That's already information. And we're going to use this vocabulary maybe to try to understand why you agree or why you disagree. And in the process, we're testing. This is a hypothesis for how abstracts work. We're going to test it against some published abstracts. And I'll give you each. This is the vocabulary that we use. If it's helpful, you don't have to. But if you're sort of trying to figure out how do we talk about this? I have one of these. Yes. So I'll put the instructions on the board. And the other thing about thinking about things from the reader's perspective is you can never be wrong. You're in charge of your own reading experience. And making that visible to other people is important, because that's where meaning is made. So it's one of these, like, you don't have to agree with me, you don't have to agree with each other. I'm really curious about what you think.
that I think some bias might play into things. And
Yeah.
What you do, what you want to read.
Oh, absolutely. In terms of do I want to read it, that's, that's what are my purposes and what am I trying to get out of this. But in terms of how well is this working as an abstract to answer the questions to allow you to make that decision. So do we have a rank? Talk to each other about rankings. So I want you to compare rankings with each other.
I'll break the ice. I thought the second one was the best one, about the moon, because it basically said.
And your look is like, really? Uh-oh. And you want number 4.
Women are from Mars and women are from Moon.
I do have to say, right, for disclosure, that 3 of us in the room are obstetricians, gynecologists.
Okay.
Right? So we're coming from a place that abstract was very easy for us to read.
Well, you said 4. You said 4.
I think you meant that you thought this article was number 4.
Which one are you?
Wait,
Okay,
sorry.
all right,
You
so,
said number 2.
I thought this was the best one.
Right.
okay.
Right, so you thought it was
I,
number
you know what? I'm going to collect data because I think that's what I think this is a small enough group that we need data.
It introduces the past.
Okay, we've got.
This is a new tool with a new finding and 2 new significant observations with it.
Okay, this is electrical engineering.
Pleasure to read.
This is the moon.
Gnarly.
This is HIV, and then we have visual.
Of when it was published.
Okay,
There's no mention.
here's the 4 of them. Can I get rankings out of the 5 of you?
You said that.
Okay.
Put them in order. Number 1 is your best. Number 4 is your worst. Give me an order, Harry. So
Oh, the first one, that's 1. The top one is 4. I was torn between the other 2. I made it make it 2, and we got that 2, 3.
Okay,
The other way around.
other way around. Okay.
But I was,
And the HIV is 2, and this one is 3. Okay. Somebody else.
I did 3. Let's go from the top. 3, 4, 1, 2.
Interesting. Cool.
So I did
Natalie.
4, 2, 1, 3.
Sandy.
First one was 4. 2. I didn't really rank 3. I said 2 for the 4th one. And I guess I would probably put 2 for the third one as well. I can't do that 1 then.
Okay, so I want to push you to like 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
I want you to compare them to each other.
Put 1.
Pardon? Which one? The HIV is 1. Interesting.
Okay, then
And I didn't know I had 3 obstetricians here.
I'll have to say 3 because I think the
That's 3,
yes.
and that's 2. Okay. Cool. I don't know your name.
The first 4, 1, 2, 3.
4, 1, 2, 3. Okay. And your name? Kathleen? Okay. Cool. All right. So we don't have a whole lot of agreement here, although we do at the same time. So let's start with number 4, with the one that gets ranked for most of the time, because that's where we have the most consensus. So let's get some discussion about. You seem to agree with one another. Why? Why is this the least favorite?
there's no purpose, and it's like all method.
Well, I thought it did have purpose. It says to avoid saturation of clipping of the DC current generated. Is desirable
Interesting.
to
Yeah.
such and such. So the purpose is there. The approach is next. We have investigated some solutions and present
Okay.
But the result is kind of like, all right, where's the result? So
All
for
right.
me,
So let's think. Cool. Let's think about. So that
I'm a
what you
former
say.
electrical engineer.
And I have to tell you, when I have electrical engineers there, occasionally I get one who says this is perfectly clear, but most of them say this is terrible. What are they doing? Okay, so
Sentences are way too long.
I was just saying, it was very hard for me to read.
it's very hard to read. So it's sort of all right. But I want to pick up with what Jocelyn just said, that it's sort of like you go to places where it seems like you're getting the information you want. It's like there is there a problem? Is there a purpose? It seems, to avoid saturation and clipping, it is desirable. It's sort of, and it's a great phrase. It's a term that emerged a few years ago, the notion of a signal phrase. A signal phrase is a sort of stereotypic set of words that indicate some function, indicate something where you see it and say, oh, this is an X. So the signal phrase for motivating problems is some version of but. And here, to avoid, it is desirable. These are signal phrases like that. Okay, you're looking for a problem? This is the problem. Are you compelled? And so let's think about why that. So what does saturation and clipping have to do?
Informative of what that does.
So they're sort of saying, there's this problem, you know.
This causes such and such.
Yeah. So let me pull up another expectation. That sentence is the third sentence. We've had 2 sentences before it. If this were a well-constructed abstract, we would hope that those 2 sentences would orient us enough to what is known that when they say, here's the problem, we say, oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So the first sentence is 4 lines long.
That's fine.
Well, but is it?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, to me, that's like, I'm not understanding what you're saying in the first sentence. It's now 4 lines long, and I'm not getting to the second one.
Okay, and so I'm trying to just distinguish 2 things. It is possible for a sentence to work badly, and it's possible for a sentence to feel burdensome and be too long, but I don't want to set up a category of like, if it's 4 lines long, it's too long. Because you can have a 4-line sentence that's not too long. It's just information. Right, so what are we trying to find out at the beginning of an abstract? What is this about? And what we get is, it's about this circuit. Thanks. What about this circuit? Let me tell you more about this circuit.
That's the way it feels.
Thanks. I know a lot about the circuit, but I don't know what I want to know, which is, why are we looking at this circuit? Why do we care about this circuit? Why are you pointing me towards this circuit? What's the problem with this circuit? It's not doing any of that for us. Okay, and then it moves, but it got published. It did. Isn't it crazy? This is the opening for the course on writing an article. It's deep in a field. But it's also the moment where the graduates are like, you mean just getting published is not the bar? I said, not here. I mean, the door is there, you can leave, but we're going to go above getting published. It's going to be good. So 2 sentences to orient us to what do we know and what's here, it would make sense, but this is not doing it. Okay, then we get this thing of to avoid saturation clipping. Where did that come from? How does that emerge from the first 2 sentences? I don't know. The electrical engineers have told me clipping is sparks. So there's something about this circuit that it can start to burn up, but who knew? And even knowing that, I can't tell from their description what it is about the circuit.
So it's the language.
It's the writers clearly have something in their head, and they got published. So somebody at the editor's level decided that they thought they understood what the writers were saying. But whatever it's going to get worse. What they've produced here doesn't transfer it to us. Doesn't transfer to us. Part of it is this week. Next one. So you say, so what do?
Use some different solutions.
All right, so we investigated some different solutions. Stop there. Well, I certainly hope so. There's no information in that. I mean, they've simply said, this is an abstract, and there is a problem, and so we investigated it. Well, yeah, I know that. What I want to find out is, what did you do? So I'm partly making fun of this, like, we investigated some solutions, great, and present a modified, is there a result?
I put question. I mean, so it says that they addressed it.
Yeah. Did they solve it? Yeah. Did they solve it? So we've got 4 sentences that in some ways have the shape of an abstract, and you could sort of like, oh, well, there's background, and then they think that they point to the problem, but we can't see it, and they point at a method, but they don't tell us what it is, and they point at a result, but they don't name it. And this is why everybody reacts to this, including the electrical engineers. Like, it looks like an abstract and it got published. It's just not very informative. It doesn't answer the questions that we're going to bring to it.
But somebody felt it was.
Somebody felt the article was publishable,
Okay.
right? How many journals push back and say you need to rewrite the abstract? Nature and Science do, but I don't know of other journals that will kick this back. Let me ask a different question. If the rest of the article reads like this abstract, how interested, and you needed to know about this, how excited would you be to read the rest of the article? Right? Because you can just feel that they don't give us what we need, even when they try to do it.
So you're making the assumption it got published not because that the article read quite differently than the abstract.
I don't even know that. I don't know the circumstances of this particular abstract, so I can't tell you that that's true.
Right. Okay.
But when we say, well, the abstract got published, actually this abstract is the beginning of an article, and the article got published in this journal that is deep in the field. And occasionally I get someone who says this is perfectly transparent, and they know photodiodes, and they say, oh, that I can see the problem in that description. I say, great, but we can't. And if you don't point the even knowledgeable readers to where you see the problem, then somebody knowledgeable might read what you've written and think, oh, the problem's over here, and you actually think it's over here. The way I describe it, so I'm going to actually talk to you about reader energy. This is a good moment for reader energy. That part of what was exciting about thinking about readers was that readers and structure and substance is that readers in the act of reading have a finite amount of energy to figure out what's going on, and that energy first goes into figuring out how is this an abstract. And only when we figure out, oh, it is an abstract and I think I know what it's doing, do we turn to interpreting what does it mean. So that can give first approximation. It's a zero-sum game, the energy going into structure and substance. And so first approximation for bad writing is writing that requires a disproportionate amount of reader energy simply to figure out what it's trying to tell us. That's bad. The worst example, the worst kind of writing, that's actually the second worst kind of writing, like paragraphs like this where you look at it and say, I know that I have no idea what's on their mind. And if I need to find out what's on their mind, I'm going to have to read the rest of the paper and put it together. That's bad. The worst kind of writing, the writing that will really kill you, is when the reader thinks she understands what the writer meant, but it's not what the writer meant. Right? Because at that moment, the reader is fine. They're just going on with their interpretation and running into the next sentence. And if the writer could be there and jump up and down and say, no, that's not what I meant, then we might get the train back on track. But a lot of stuff gets published with that.
But how does it? But you only know that in retrospect. Maybe you know that in retrospect. And you know when people have conversations about it, there's a paper that I used as an example in an article once, because it was just, actually it's often I've used the abstract often, and one of the people who works in the field said, I taught that paper for several years until we finally realized that we had no idea what they were actually trying to do. We thought we did, which is why we were teaching it all this time, but the more we looked at it and the more other stuff showed up, we realized that whatever they were trying, what we thought they were doing is probably not what they thought they were doing, and you couldn't tell. Such things happen. All right, so we got some sense of these expectations are real, and it can help account for why this one isn't working. Okay, let me see, I'm going to jump around a little bit. The next consensus is on C, but I want to actually go look at B next. So. The moon one, I want to. So this got a favorite vote from you, and it got a lot of twos. Yeah. 2 ones and 2 twos. So let's talk about this one. So somebody who liked this abstract, why?
It required no effort to understand. Yeah. It created a word picture. It defined a problem. It gave you 2 novel pieces of information and how you obtained those.
So it raises all the expectations. Part of
piece of cake.
Yeah, and part of what's cool about
any notes in the margin.
Part of what's cool about this is the way I like to think. I keep it around because the motivating problem actually comes in layers. The biggest problem we hear is about where do we land? Okay, which is an interesting problem. It's like, where do we land on the moon? You're right. That's a problem. I don't have to go grab somebody and show them things to say, okay, that problem gets turned into a different question. Yes? Which is, where is there water? In the form of ice. That gets turned into a different question again. Is there water in the form of ice in this crater? And then we get a problem. Why is that a live question? Is there water in this crater? There could be a lot of different answers. Nobody's ever looked. We don't know anything about this crater. And the answer is, I need to know something about the crater. Or, absolutely, everybody says there's water here, but their methods are wrong. And we're going to explode it. So why don't we know about if there's water in the crater?
You mean before this paper?
Before this paper, yeah.
The inadequate technology that was used.
Yeah, well, and lack resolution. So we've gone from where do we land on the moon to there. So this is one of those, people have collected data, they get contradictory results. That's a problem. Which ones do we believe? We don't know. Why? Because none of them are sufficiently resolved, is what this says. Okay, if the problem is insufficient resolution, what's the solution?
Better resolution.
And it's right there, right? As soon as due to lack of resolution, here, signal phrase, I'm going to tell you what we did. Here, we present new 20-meter resolution, and I can just stop there and say, well, I don't know what the bad resolution was, but I'll bet you it was bigger than 20 meters. We can just, so here's the problem. The motive coming in layers to, this is what this paper's worried about, here's an answer to it, here's what we found. Actually, what we found is that we didn't find anything, it doesn't look like there's any water, and then it goes off. All right, people who didn't like this one, why not? So those are the things that it does, but you don't have to like it. Why not? We want to name what bothered you, people who ranked it number 2.
Somebody ranked it number 4.
That was me.
Yeah. Why?
I just, I think for me, I just want things a little more scientifically written. Not that it's, you know what I mean? It's just, I'm used
science.
to a different format.
It's from science.
It's from science, but I don't know. As I was reading it, I was just like,
How about not
I don't
science,
like
structure?
Yeah, it wasn't structured how I normally. I found myself distracted in the reading of it.
Where and when? I'm curious
Like
about
the
that.
first-
At the very first couple sentences. Okay. Interesting. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I just did. You know, as I read through it maybe 2 or 3 times, I'm like, okay, yeah, it does have all these elements we want, but just, just maybe even the formatting at the top being different. It just.
Okay.
It
was
it biased me.
Well, it sounds, so it's not, I'll try, it felt unfamiliar. Is that, it's
It's not unfamiliar because I do a lot of other pleasure
but it's,
reading,
but it's not it's not the kind of extract that you would read in your field. Okay.
So that's why
That's
that's why I
interesting.
recognize my own bias.
Cool.
I think I would agree. I mean, as much as I hate to say it, at 6:30 at night to read something that is that is difficult to read because it's not in my knowledge base.
Right, it's not familiar like that. I could get to this so much
So
more
that's
easily.
really interesting. Okay.
So if I read it first thing in the morning, I might feel very differently.
No, that's interesting. No, that's fair enough. So because this part of what I'm trying to do here is to raise a sense of what is an abstract do. And so, in fact, since none of us know anything about lunar landings or Shackleton Crater or everything we know has to come out of this abstract. And so, yeah, it does require engaging with a new topic and learning from it, which this one enables us to do. And you just didn't want to. Got it. No problem. No problem.
wasn't being as objective as I
narrative,
should,
I'm
but I'm
ready
honest
to
about it.
tolerate some radar data.
I would say that
Be able to follow you through your radar data.
that if I were reviewing this abstract for a conference, I would say, you know what? I've had it for the day. Because, and I can't do anymore because it's too much work, and I wouldn't know if it's too much work because I've hit my wall for the day, or it's really too much work, and I would have to come back the next day
And
to say, okay.
And part of why I'm asking people to balance this is that people see, and so I want to talk through that we can see the structures there.
Right.
I've also had people sort of feel like, yeah, but there's a sense of like, what did you really get out of it? Like, it doesn't hit hard enough. Partly it does a lot of, here we present new data, the polarization found correlated with this, there is no correlation, that they should be done there. There's no correlation between this and, like they're trying to say there's no water. And they ended up like almost obfuscating it at the end a little bit. There's a lot of verbiage in those last few sentences. And they start qualifying it. Our data are consistent with the ice being present only as disseminated grains and the lunar, like, what are you trying to say?
To me, I felt like
Yeah, so
trying to sell me something.
well, what I flag here is that they've set it up really nicely, and people react to that, and they say, "No, I understand this. I want to go re-rate our data," and they seem to get a result that they back away from. And I can just tell you that the next paper in Science on the Shackleton crater, this one says, "No, there's no ice," and the next one says, "Yes, there's." So that like every time we get new data, we're stuck in this controversy. This is going on. And I think what happened here is that they tried to say, hey, and there's no ice, and the reviewer said, nah. And so they get very qualifying, and it gets sort of annoying at the end. That's what I keep hearing from people who don't like it. I want to go look at 4, and then I want to go back to 3, okay? So 4 didn't score well with you guys. So talk to me about 4. What does it do, and what doesn't it do? This is the visual system. We're going to talk about 3 because I know everybody likes 3, but I want to talk about.
I think it did a little bit of orienting in the beginning, and I feel like it did give results at the end, but the middle is kind of a little mushy.
I thought it gave a conclusion but no results.
Yeah, maybe that's a more accurate area. With the use of functional magnetic resonant imaging,
Yeah.
show that the capacity limit is narrowly reflected in one line.
So because in their testing, the MR, they only saw one small area light up, we therefore know that one small area is doing all those operations?
So
No, I don't know that.
And part of what's happened is that this is, I'm going to have to flip this one out, I know that, because it's like 2003 where you could say we did fMRI, and it's like, and we know something.
Accepted that.
And people, because it was the beginning of, it was the first time, what's going on in the brain? We can put people in fMRI and see what lights up, tells us something. Whereas in 2020, everybody, when I have neurobiologists, they go like, are you kidding? Like, you can't, it's like saying, we investigated different solutions. We did fMRIs. Tell me more about it.
There's actually a paper written by somebody who put a dead fish in an fMRI and got a result from it.
Things light up.
And things lit up, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's right. I will have to swap this out. So this often competes with number 2 for the top. I'm just going to. We're a small group of readers, and you are really attached to number 3. We're going to talk about it, but I want to include for you when I've done this across audiences. Usually 2 and 4 are the ones that people respond to that I don't know anything about this field, but when I read this abstract, I have some sense of what it is that I will find in this paper, and I think it's accurate, and I know enough to make this judgment about whether to read it or not. And people waffle on. Some people like 4. Some people say, no, you can't say just fMRI. That's an approach and not a method. I need to know more. Some people like 2, and other people say, did they really get a result, or did they just... But there's something more. These are above the bar. They're way better than 1. Like way better than 1? Okay, so let's go look at 3. So walk me through what's present in 3. Why are you...
Well, the one thing I'll say, the one thing that I don't necessarily like about it is like the bolded things. Like, I don't.
Yeah, I don't either.
I don't necessarily like that.
And some journals give that to you, right? That's part of what I'm flagging, that we're handed a structure.
We're very used to seeing, most of our journals do that, but I don't necessarily like that, but I do feel like there was orientation
Okay.
to the why. Certainly.
Where?
The purpose. The purpose of
Where-
the study is to,
Evaluate the effect.
of an elective C-section plus the medication on breastfeeding mothers for
Okay.
HIV and AIDS.
What's the question?
So I really, this to me is a pilot study, right? I saw this as a pilot study early on
Mm-hmm.
to be able to look and say, hey, is it worth giving these women medication?
What are they
And
trying to
C-section.
find out? What I'm flagging is, it
understand what
says,
you're saying.
it says
They
the
don't
objective,
want
they
to
don't
say-
actually ask a question. I mean, there's an answer to a question in the title, which is the preventing transmission. But the objective is to evaluate the effect of cesarean, what? It makes them happy?
Prophylaxis.
It makes
Yeah,
them, you
yeah,
know,
it says prophylaxis regimen.
Right. What they don't say in the objective is to look to see if they're lowering HIV load or increasing CD4 count. So that's
Yes.
what, right.
yes. You can't, it's
So this gets into our bias as well.
Yeah.
Because that's our assumption. I mean, that's
Yeah.
something we live with every
Yep.
day.
We're
So
Yep.
assuming
that's
that.
Yep.
that's right.
Yep. And it's a lovely moment. I didn't know I would have got obstetricians and gynecologists here on this one. So, but I often make this one familiar but incomplete, because our tendency is to, I can read this. I know what this means. I'm sure I know what it means, but you're filling in a lot of information that is not explicit in it. The article I was talking about, it's an abstract in yeast, and people say, and even the molecular biology said, and then they realized, no, it said, the results mean X. I said, what is the result? I said, you're right, they don't say what the result is. Or we're trying to do, and it doesn't name it. So this is one, I want to flag it for two reasons. One is that it gestures at the objective is to evaluate the effect, which sounds great, except it doesn't answer. My question is, what are you trying to find out? What do you want to know? Prophylactic regime, but if I know, to see if this is what happens. It's like, great, now I can, part of it is I'd like to be able, for me at the end of an introduction, I try to get my students to take a standard that if we finish your introduction and stop, could we predict what kinds of data, like what the figures might look like to answer that question? And here it's like I don't know whether whether it's psychological benefit or overall health, or in this case it's very explicitly HIV transmission.
Yeah, I didn't see all that. When I looked at it, it just looked.
It's really familiar.
It was very familiar.
It's
it was
really
easy
familiar.
To read. It was just kind of hands, spoon feeding it to me, and
Yep.
I
Yep.
accepted it.
Yep.
I'm like, okay.
Absolutely.
But
Good girl.
what this struck me is like this is like down to the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts, written
But there
by
was-
people who don't have English as their first language, and are just getting just the facts, ma'am.
Yeah.
Just the facts.
But they give you the results.
They do give you the result. It's way better than one.
Right.
It's way better than one. It's not as complete as 2 and 4, but it's more familiar
Right.
to this room, and so people jump on it. And I just want to flag it that the difference between information that meets our expectations and information that is familiar and we think we know what is being said. In this case, there's enough here to feel confident that we actually do know what the question was, even though they didn't name it. But we've probably all read papers where, in fact, we thought we knew what the question was, and it turns out when you read the paper that it's not the question that you thought it was, it's something else, and the abstract miscued, and it didn't work. Yeah.
I'm not, obviously, this is not my field, but if I saw this abstract, there's no hook for me to read this paper. I mean, basically, it's sort of dead on arrival. It says
Right,
We
so,
did this and it's nothing, nothing, you know.
so
You
now,
kinda already wanna know it.
I mean, to me,
But you're writing your own paper and, oh, here's a piece of data I need.
I'm telling you, it
Well-
doesn't eliminate transmission.
Okay, so, but would you read the paper after this? No, I mean,
Well,
who-
Because
See,
I'd
but
want to
that's-
know, because I'd want to know more of the
Yeah.
specifics in terms
But-
of dosaging, whatever.
yeah.
But part of it is it doesn't name the problem. It does give the objective, but it doesn't name the problem, and the problem is really pressing. The problem, or it certainly was at this time, the problem was one that is going to grab people. We started with the draw people in. A significant source of HIV infection in the general population is neonatal transmission at birth, from HIV-infected mothers to neonates. To date, no method has been found to reduce this. One possibility is that the cesarean section plus blah, 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 and we tested that.
So I would say that if I saw this abstract in a journal in 2020, right now,
Yep.
I'd blow right past it because it would say, been there, done that.
Right,
You know
and this
right?
is-
You know better, yeah.
Right. Now, if you said to me this was in a journal in 1993,
2010.
um,
Maybe a little, actually, no, it's earlier than that. It's 2004, I think is when I was putting.
where
Okay.
So that, I mean, that has a lot of that.
So
that
I-
adds a lot to
Because we didn't have all that data at that time.
correct.
That you
Right.
could give it and raise these favorable counts for the mom without hurting the babies.
And I'm not, so we're deep into the, like, do you like this research? I'm not interested in that right now. I'm interested in, can we recognize what a successful abstract includes? And including enough information to be able to date it. Like, if this is giving me everything and this is all they've got, then I'm not going to read this because it's clearly too far out of date. So, two things that I want to grab on this one. One is that it doesn't motivate us with a problem, and that problem is probably pressing, and probably would be, like there's a significant problem here, and I'd like to know how significant it is before deciding how much I want to invest here. And you guys are in field, so this is context controls meaning. People who are in field bring a ton of context, but even when we have the context, the way to describe it is, I would like to know that the problem I think you're looking at is the problem that you think you're looking at. We have a lot of shared problems, but sometimes, and I mean, it was a great moment. I had a Chinese student a few years ago when we were, more than 10 years ago. Early on, we were looking at somebody's introduction, and we were really struggling, like, what was it doing? And suddenly she says, wait, oh, this is a terribly written paper. It was so great. She said, what they say they're doing is not what they're doing. The question they're asking is, and then she says what it is, and the whole room says, oh, you're absolutely right. But that frustration of trying, they said they're doing X and they actually go and do Y is the problem, that they don't know what they're doing, or they do know what they're doing, but they've miscued us by not, and in part not naming what it is they're trying to get to. And now we're going back to that moment at the very beginning where I said something happens in the writing. It isn't typically till we're in the writing that we name the known and the unknown explicitly. It's been there all along. It's driving the whole paper. The field is interested in this, but it didn't get named here. So that's one takeaway. The second is that I'm not thrilled with these kinds of structured abstracts that have these headings, because the headings don't match what readers need. You can fulfill the headings without fulfilling the reader's needs, because it doesn't ask us for the problem. There's a couple more of these in the later parts of the handout that do this again. One of them, I think says background. It's like, great, nobody wants the background. Yes, the one on page abstract number 8. Background. I want to know what the problem is, and it doesn't tell us.
But if the journal says this is the format in which you do it,
I know. So what this is one, and I did this with proposals as well. Part of why I do what I do is that I do put writing in the hands of readers. And so readers need certain things, and we don't have a vocabulary for naming it. And so journals will give us a format that actually doesn't meet readers' needs. And so that's where I want writers to hijack it. It says background. Great. I'm going to put something that the reviewers will, or the editors will recognize as background. But what nobody wants the background. They want to get oriented to what we know so that they can recognize the legitimacy of what we don't know that's driving this paper, and that will go, the question goes in the background. But they don't, you can get out of this without ever writing the question. And that, to me, is a problem. Like, I want to fulfill readers' needs because I think it makes everything much more efficient. I want to be disagreeing with the writer because I understand what they're saying, but I don't think it's true, versus I'm disagreeing with you because I misunderstood what you said.
So
Yeah.
what you're saying, I think, is that it's not the structure part of it that bothers you. It's the words they choose to put to the structure.
I'm happy. I'm happy with the structure of the abstract overall, in that the things they point to are at the moments that I would expect them. However, the sentences, the information presented in those locations is inadequate to answer the questions that a reader's bringing to it. Okay, so it's not just, I mean, yes, it's about wording, but it's actually about what information, that's why I put it.
Results are results.
Results, and so I've got results here, and on some level, results is what we're always reading for. Right. The rest of it is, give me the context so that I recognize that the result is a result. Mm-hmm. What's the question? What do we already know? How did you get there? Okay, now I can read the result. And it does, what constitutes a result varies from field to field. I had a geoscience student who said, if there are not numbers in the abstract, I will not read it. And we all looked at her like, and she explained that in her field, she does a lot of analytic analysis, and she said, you can't talk about anything for real in the area that I work unless you get the numbers. And if somebody gives me an abstract with no numbers, then clearly they don't understand what they're doing, and I'm not going to read this paper. It was a really interesting moment. So that we have a lot of expectations about what we're going to get and how it's going to work together. All right, we're almost done. So a couple things. Just what's in here are different examples of abstracts to different degrees. I'm not thrilled with this notion of, as I say, of the structure, and I want to hijack it. If you have to write for a journal that doesn't let you name the hypothesis, the question, or the problem, but gives you a structure, doesn't give you a heading like that, and you have to use their structure, your reader will thank you for naming the problem wherever it shows up. Because that was really helpful to us. It's also true with proposal writing, and part of it is that the instructions we give people haven't done this kind of analysis of, like, what do we really want here? So people are sort of making up rules, do this. I told you a lot of the advice we get is bad advice. And so this is, here, do this. And then people do it, say, no, not that. Well, I followed the instructions. What do you want from me? And so I want to go closer to, actually, as readers, we know what we want. And we can start to hone in on it.
It seems to me, the structure, all they've really done is sort of made a mini paper out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of obfuscated the real reason why we have an abstract, which is
to make a one-paragraph argument for what is the core of the paper. Yeah. I mean, all the instructions, it is a summary. Yes, it's a summary, because every section needs to show up, because every section's there, because we can't make knowledge unless those sections show up. If you give me your result and have no method, I don't believe you. If you give me your method and no result, I'm not interested. If you give me your method and your result and I don't know what you're trying to find out, I got other things to do than try to figure that out, right? But the abstract is, it can be, that going back to this notion at the beginning, it's a paper, it's a document that goes places that the paper never goes. And I think about it as a freestanding document that is really useful in the scientific community. We get invited to conferences, we get invited to journals, we get sent out for review on the basis of it. And the core for me is that the best abstracts are informative. They give readers the information that readers need so that readers can do their jobs. And their job is to get back to doing the research as efficiently as possible. not missing an important result.